Welcome to Novara Live. I'm Michael Walker, and I'm delighted to be joined by Ash Sarkar. Great to have you here.
Michael, it was a lovely holiday away, but it could only have been made better by your presence on, a little Neapolitan Campari spritz bar. But I can't have everything.
Well, I wasn't invited, but I also went to Naples earlier this year. It is a fabulous city, so I'm jealous that you've just come back. Next time, invite me. Though. You can't. It's all very well saying it would have been nice if I was there, but I didn't know about it. Coming up tonight, the UK recognises the state of Palestine for the first time, along with some other countries, Australia, France, Canada, etc. Reform, I think, have made a pretty shocking announcement, actually. They want to cancel indefinite leave to remain for migrants that already have it. So sort of taking away the rights of people who thought they would have the right to live here for the rest of their lives. We also speak to Yanis Varoufakis on Israel's attempt to smear the Gaza flotilla as a terrorist flotilla. TikTok has fired their entire UK online safety team. And Corbyn and Sultana, so Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana, hint at unity after a legal row. After Friday's show, I think the Your Party controversy reached its nadir when Zara Sultana threatened to sue Jeremy Corbyn. But it seems like we're in a slightly better position than we were on Friday. So I'll be discussing that with Ash. As ever, if you'd like to support our work, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. And as ever, we want to know what you think. So let us know what you're thinking in the comments, or you can tweet us on the hashtag Novara Live. On Sunday, the UK, Canada, Australia, France, Portugal, Belgium, and other countries all recognise for the first time the state of Palestine.
Today, to revive the hope of peace and a two-state solution, I state clearly, as Prime Minister of this great country, that the United Kingdom formally recognises the state of Palestine.
Effective today, Sunday, the 21st of September 2025, the Commonwealth of Australia recognises the state of Palestine.
So we will announce a recognition, but which is the beginning of a political process and a peace and security plan for everybody. So right after this recognition, we have a first phase, which is, I would say, the emergency phase. Ceasefire, release of all hostages, and third, restoring the humanitarian roads and the stabilization of Gaza. We have a second package, which is the day after. We will revert on that, how to organize Gaza in terms of governance, security, and reconstruction. And third package, the perspective of the two states. But recognizing a Palestinian state today is the only way to provide a political solution to a situation which has to stop.
That was Keir Starmer, Australia's Anthony Albanese, and then France's Emmanuel Macron. And of course, this recognition from these Western states is long overdue. The majority of UN members had already recognised the state of Palestine a decade ago. But the Palestinian ambassador to the UK, Hassam Zomlot, thinks it's still significant.
The issue today is ending the denial of our existence that started 108 years ago, in 1917. And I think today the British people should celebrate a day when history is being corrected, when wrongs are being righted, when recognition of the wrongs of the past are beginning to be corrected, and when taking responsibility of that colonial era, because that era has led us directly to the genocide in Gaza today, and that era has led to the ethnic cleansing of 2/3 of the Palestinian people during the Nakba and during the British Mandate. So today, we welcome such a historic step, and historic because, as Secretary David Lammy said in the UN in July, the hands of history is on our shoulders, meaning that the hands of British history on this whole conflict. So, of course, we will welcome it, Laura. And, of course, this is a step forward in the direction of peace, in the direction of justice.
Israel has, as you would imagine, opposed the recognition.
יש לי מסר ברור לאותם מנהיגים שמכירים במדינה פלסטינית לאחר הטבח הנורא ב7 באוקטובר. אתם מעניקים פרס עצום לטרור. ויש לי מסר נוסף עבורכם. זה לא יהיה. לא תקום מדינה פלסטינית ממערב לירדן.
Now, for those listening on the podcast, that was Netanyahu reiterating his long expressed position that he has no interest whatsoever in a two-state solution and that he will never allow the creation of any Palestinian state. Now, that was put to the UK Minister for the Middle East, Hamish Falconer, on Sky this morning.
Perhaps we should be clear of the language. It's not between Israelis and Palestinians. It's the Israeli government and Hamas, and neither represent all of their people either. What we do know is that Hamas does not believe in the existence of an Israeli state, and Benjamin Netanyahu, in response, has said there will never be a Palestinian state. It's not going to happen with those two parties running the show, is it?
That's exactly why I said Israelis and Palestinians. Clearly, there are extremes on both sides who believe in one state from the river to the sea. You hear it from Hamas, and you hear it from some extremists on the Israeli side as well. That will never work. That cannot work. There are millions of people in that land that must live side by side. There are people on both sides who are committed. For example, the president of the Palestinian Authority has agreed a Palestinian state should be demilitarized. No army, no air force. It should pose no threat to the Israelis, but with whom it should live in peace. That is the vision that we want to see advanced.
Now, first of all, this idea that this state should have no military and no means to self-defense. Fine, if you want to have a situation where the whole of Israel-Palestine is demilitarized and it becomes a sort of area that the UN sort of administers militarily or something, potentially fine. But if you leave one of them as the most heavily armed state in the region and the Palestinians as having no army whatsoever, what's the deterrent from Israel doing what it's always done, which is bomb Palestinians at the first opportunity? I also thought that was just full of denial from the British government about the state of the situation. So he said Hamas want a Palestine from the river to the sea, which is true. I mean, they have stated they'd be willing to have, they'd be willing to accept something far short of that, but that is their expressed position. But then he says there are extremists on the Israeli side who think that as well. It's the expressed position of Netanyahu. It's not an extremist in Israel. He is the democratically elected leader of Israel, and he's dominated Israel politics for decades now. So this idea that it's some marginal position that only extremists hold in Israel, that there should be a greater Israel from the river to the sea and that there should be no Palestine, that's not an extreme position. That's the political center ground in Israel. And why that matters is because deluding yourself that, if only we can strengthen the moderates in Israel, we don't actually need to put any significant external pressure. You didn't defeat apartheid South Africa by saying, some extremists want to keep the black people as second-class citizens, but let's hope that the moderates gain some strength. No, you boycott them, you sanction them. You say, I don't care what the center ground is among your political community. You're going to have no choice, which is what we should be doing when it comes to Israel. But, the British government still can't seem to get a grip of that. When the UK isn't explicitly in denial about the nature of Israel, it's at best criminally complacent.
How concerned are you about the risk of Israel using this as a pretext to start annexing parts of the West Bank?
We have been clear, and I have been clear to the Israeli foreign minister, we have been clear to the Israeli government that they must not do that.
So this is the people to the right of Netanyahu, but sort of Smotrich and the far right in Israel have said that in response to this announcement of recognition, what Israel should do is annex way more of the West Bank. Of course, Netanyahu is fully backing the continued colonization of the West Bank, but that particular demand to annex it in the immediate term is from them. Ash, Yvette Cooper is saying very sternly that the Israelis must not annex the West Bank. We've been very clear on that. Is that good enough?
Yeah, I'm sure that's going to be fine. Just a bit more finger wagging. That's going to stop Israel from doing something that's been doing for decades, which is supporting materially armed religious fanatic settlers to, unilaterally take more land with the full support of the IDF and also the backing of the Israeli government themselves. It's certainly going to stop, Likud competitor parties from adopting annexation as their party policy, which, by the way, is the policy of so-called moderates in the Israeli Knesset, as well as as well as, the extremists like Smotrich and Ben Gvir. I mean, one of the things which I found really interesting about the last couple of days has been all of these people in UK media who are pro-Israel. They've come out and they've said Keir Starmer's decision to recognise the state of Palestine, along with other countries, it's rewarding terrorism, right? So it's rewarding Hamas for the actions of October 7th. And let me just say, for the sake of argument, I'm going to accept that point. It's the reward of terrorism. So what does that mean for our recognition of the state of Israel, which has been British government policy, I believe, since 1951, if not earlier, which followed a terrorist campaign waged against not just the Palestinians who lived in what was then the British Mandate of Palestine, but British soldiers themselves. So you had the King David Hotel bombing, which killed, I think, 91 people, including British personnel. You had nearly 30 British soldiers killed after a Zionist militia bombed the Cairo to Haifa train. You had the Sergeants affair, where Irgun, in retaliation for death sentences being handed down to two Zionist militia members, kidnapped two British sergeants, murdered them, hung their bodies in a forest, and then also booby-trapped those bodies. So that was all done in the run-up to 1948, the run-up to the Nakba, and we formally recognised the State of Israel just a few years later. And of course, they've been, our closest, I'm using scare quotes here, our closest allies in the region ever since. So if recognising the State of Palestine, which, by the way, I think is going to come with an awful lot more caveats and fudges than the recognition of the State of Israel ever did, if that's rewarding terrorism, then what on earth is our continued material support for the State of Israel and all the diplomatic cover we've been giving them as well?
We could talk about this for a lot longer. I mean, I personally think this is potentially not that significant. It seems kind of, Keir Starmer only announced it after Macron did, and it doesn't really cost very much to recognise a state that doesn't really exist, right? Let's face it, at this point in time, Israel is not going to allow a functional state to exist, so sort of merely recognising it better than nothing, but doesn't mean that much. The reason we're not going to talk about it anymore now is because I've got an interview with Yanis Varoufakis coming up later in the show where we discuss this in more depth, and we'd be at risk of becoming repetitive otherwise. And we have many stories to get through. Nigel Farage has already laid out his plans to stop irregular migration to Britain, and today he turned his attention to legal migration.
But there's been too little debate about legal immigration, too little debate about the consequences of what happened and you remember the days of Peter Mandelson boasting how they were going to open the doors. And indeed, for 20 years, I've been asking questions about the sheer number of people coming into this country, the impact that it's had on housing, on health, on roads. But I've been told for 20 years to shut up and go away.
Now, as you would imagine, Farage used some pretty dodgy statistics in his speech, including figures which had already been withdrawn by the think tank that produced them. And again, as you would imagine, he wants to make it harder for people to come to Britain. No surprises there. This announcement did shock me, though. It's a plan to abolish indefinite leave to remain, even for people who already have the status. Now, indefinite leave to remain is open to people who have worked and lived in the UK legally for 5 continuous years. People who get it acquire most of the rights of British citizens, other than the right to vote in general elections. But as the name suggests, gaining indefinite leave to remain, or ILR, means you have been granted permission to stay in the UK indefinitely. Now, that means you may have put down roots, started a family. You will have assumed that you will be able to continue on that path. You have something called indefinite leave to remain. But Reform wants to strip that away. And instead, those with ILR, indefinite leave to remain, will have to apply for a work visa every 5 years, which will have a £60,000 income requirement unless you're in a shortage occupation. So Reform, terrified as every other government is about us not having enough care workers. So they talk tough on immigration and say, but of course we're not going to raise taxes, which means we can't pay care workers more, which means we are going to need loads of immigration, even though we're going to say it's terrible for the country. London Mayor Sadiq Khan had a pretty strong response, I think, to this announcement from Reform. He said thousands of Londoners have indefinite leave to remain. They have legal rights and are our friends, neighbours and colleagues, contributing hugely to our city. Threatening to deport people living and working here legally is unacceptable. In his speech, Farage also laid out plans to limit the rights of people on work visas to bring dependents to the UK. Again, not particularly surprising, but this statement from him was particularly telling, I think.
All over the world, you apply for a work visa, that visa is for you. Not to bring your family, it's for you. It's for a set period of time, and at the end of it you leave, or you're physically deported. That is how a normal work visa works.
Now, one problem with Nigel Farage press conferences is he makes so many big claims that it takes a while to check them all. I think that's sort of part of the strategy, sort of just bombarded with information that doesn't sound quite right. And this one didn't sound quite right to me. So I looked it up in pretty much every rich country in the world, in Germany, France, the USA, Canada, Australia, Japan. If you have a work visa, if you meet certain requirements, there's often income requirements or the like, you can bring dependents to join you. That's the norm everywhere, apart from, now guess the countries where you can't bring a dependent if you're working: Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Now, why I think this is very relevant is because in the immigration debate, there are lots of people, they're actually often on the libertarian right, so sort of people on the, I suppose, the more populist nationalist right, the Bannons of the world. What they often want to do is say, look, let's just pull up the drawbridge, and if that hurts business, so be it, whatever. I value sort of ethno-nationalism more than I value economic growth. But on the libertarian side, what people are often very keen on is the Qatari, the Saudi, the UAE model, whereby you have all your grunt work done by immigrants, but those immigrants are in every single way second-class citizens. So in sort of Qatar, UAE, you'll often have lots of people coming over from Bangladesh, India, Ethiopia perhaps, and they're doing the sort of menial, we shouldn't say it, they're doing difficult things. They're building stadiums, but they're treated with very little respect. They have to sort of live in their own confines. They have no rights whatsoever. But the idea is it's still worth it for them to do because they can send some money home. But they're not integrated in any way whatsoever in society. In fact, the opposite. They're sort of kept separate from society. And it seems to me that Nigel Farage in this announcement is suggesting we move to something a bit more like that. And I think that's kind of the only way you can interpret saying what a normal country does is not allow dependents. If you come here to work, you work, then you go home, right? The only way that's a normal country is if you're thinking of normal as being Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Ash, do you think Nigel Farage is sort of, I mean, because he is someone who cares about economic growth. He's not sort of a Steve Bannon type like that. He's from the city, right? He's a former banker. Is he planning to take us somewhere along the lines of the Gulf monarchies?
Well, the thing is, the Gulf monarchies in lots of ways have become something of a city on the hill for lots of people on the more libertarian right. One is because there's absolutely no workers' rights to speak of. So this migrant labour class that you've talked about, Michael, they don't have the right to unionize. They don't have the right to collective bargaining. Very often they even have their passports confiscated, they're worked to death, and they are rendered invisible in terms of, where it is they live, how it is they live. It's so separate from, the moneyed class that exists in these Gulf monarchies. There's a very interesting thing about these Gulf monarchies, which is they're not actually anti-immigration at all. They rely on slave labor, basically, on the one hand. But on the other, they're very much rolling out the red carpet to, Western influencers and all the rest of it. They're saying, we won't tax you on your crypto profits. They want a lot of immigration. What they want is, very much two tiers of immigration. So slave labor from the global south and preferential treatment of white Westerners, from the global north. There is something which I think, as I was listening to Nigel Farage there, I was thinking, which is these people aren't conservatives. They are ultra liberals, right? Ultra neoliberals in this particular way, which is something that you hear from conservative thinkers, the likes of David Goodhart, for instance, is that one of their criticisms of immigration is that it weakens the ties of community, of loyalty, of a sense of value in the country that you're in. And David Goodhart refers to it as somewheres and nowheres. Now, I reject an awful lot of what he has to say. I mean, I think that probably the bigger thing that weakens community ties is if you're a renter and you've got to move house every 6 to 12 months. But I digress. There is this criticism that immigration creates somewheres and nowheres. Now, if what you're saying, as you know, a conservative like Nigel Farage says he is, that what you want from immigrants is that they basically have no ties to this country. You know, it's explicitly temporary. It's for 5 years. You do your job and then you piss off. No kids, no dependents. You're not really having much of a life here. I mean, most people, they don't live to work, right? They work to live. They work precisely so they can have a social life and a family life and social ties around them. You know, what Nigel Farage is saying is, no, you live to work when you're in this country. And then you piss off and you go somewhere else. Is that I can't think of anything which is going to be worse for things like community cohesion. Because what you're saying is that if you're in this country, you don't really have a life. You're not going to have any of those, non-financial ties, non-financial sense of investment and value in this country. The only thing that you value here is your working life. I mean, if anything is going to create a lot of somewheres, not a lot of somewheres, an awful lot of nowheres and not a lot of somewheres. It's what Nigel Farage wants. So he's not a real conservative. If you take this thing about community ties seriously.
A clarification, because someone said in the comment, you can in Saudi bring sort of dependents, but it's the case that, so for the vast majority of immigrants in Qatar, Saudi Arabia and the Gulf monarchies, they're doing manual labor or they're working sort of in service roles in rich people's houses. So the vast majority can't, and which isn't the case in rich countries. That you often need sort of to meet some kind of financial requirement. But I think the idea in most of the West is that if you come and work here and you've got a reasonable enough job, you can probably bring someone over at some point. Whereas in Qatar, if you're one of those rich people that's gone to work in financial services, for example, then you might be able to bring someone. But their economic model is based on, as Ash said, you don't come there to work and live. You come there to work, then you go home to live. If you're able to live. Someone also said in the comments, aren't lots of people working there in debt bondage, which by my understanding is often the case. And I think you have quite a lot of modern slavery there as well. When you give people no rights, they get exploited. Surprise, surprise. Actually, quickly, Ash, before we move on to our next topic, because we haven't discussed it so much, withdrawing indefinite leave to remain from people who already have it, that to me did seem different. I kind of feel like if, I like living in a high immigration country, but I often say, and I say this if I go on, right-wing talk shows or whatever, if you want lower immigration, that's fine. It's a political disagreement. I think it's fine how it is. I like living in a very multicultural society. But if you want to make the requirements slightly stricter, and it probably was too high under Boris Johnson when it was 900,000 a year, whatever, that's fine. But I think there have to be some red lines. And my red lines are that, Britain is a multi-ethnic, multicultural country, and it will always be that way. Because I think the moment you start sort of going back on that, you're somewhere really scary. And I think you don't strip people of rights that they currently have. And stripping people who already have indefinite leave to remain of that right does to me seem, quite different to the kind of things that we've been talking about in this country up until now.
I mean, it's completely disgusting. Like it's really, really disgusting. Like, think about what that means just in practical terms for people's lives. So if you've got indefinite leave to remain, the likelihood is that you have a partner here in this country. You may well have kids. You've been paying into the system through taxation, national insurance contributions for years, if not decades. And suddenly you could find yourself no longer having the right to exist here. After you've established all of these ties, you've paid in so much to our welfare state, contributed so much to our system. Now, the very basis on which your life is built could be torn away from you at any moment. If you're a high-skilled worker and say you're working for the NHS or you're an engineer or something like that, why on earth would you stay? why on earth would you stay, especially when your skills are in such high demand in other countries? Now, I know that Nigel Farage says, oh, well, you know, we're not going to do this for, labour shortage positions, you know, worried about the NHS and all the rest of it. Well, guess what? People in the NHS, they also have relationships with people who aren't in the NHS, right? Couples, families, you know, you're not just making a decision as the sort of atomized individual, right? You do think about the conditions of your partner, the conditions of your kids. And you also think about, do I really want to stay in this country where people like me are going to be treated in this way? So it's utterly disgusting. And I think it would be completely catastrophic. But I think that what this is sort of setting up is to have an immigration enforcement agency which resembles ICE a lot more than it does our present style of border enforcement. So at the moment, you know, you have border enforcement, you've got some raids, you've got raids of workplaces, but you don't have people, you know, frequently on a daily basis just being snatched off the street because they might look like an immigrant or they sound like an immigrant. And that's exactly what's happening in the United States at the moment with ICE. And that's the only way in which you could make a system like this workable, where, you know, you've got thousands and thousands of people with indefinite leave to remain, and suddenly you're making that immigration status precarious, is that you would need a much more interventionist and a much more fascistic style of immigration enforcement. And I do think that that's where this is going.
Fiona in the comments, who from her picture seems like she has a dog that looks like mine, says, I've got indefinite leave to remain at the moment and I qualify for citizenship, but I can't afford the £1,700 it costs. Now, my understanding is sort of the cost of applying for this kind of thing just keeps going up, and it's become a real way for the Home Office to milk people financially. I think there was a headline recently, I can't remember, maybe it was under the Tories, but they wanted to make the Home Office self-sustaining in the sense that everything the Home Office did would be funded by milking migrant sort of application fees. I can't imagine that would have paid for the police, but something along those lines. But they are making a lot of money from this, and they keep raising the price because they think this is win-win. One, it encourages people not to apply, and two, we make a bunch of money from this. After a dreadful week for the left, the split between Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana reached an absolute nadir on Friday night when at 11:30 p.m, so half an hour before midnight, Zara Sultana suggested she was planning to sue the person who was supposed to be her co-leader. So this was a message she put up on Twitter and Instagram. Over the past 24 hours, a number of false and defamatory statements have been published about me concerning the launch of your party's membership portal. The portal was properly launched in accordance with the party's roadmap. At no point was members' data misused or put at risk. All funds received from members were ring-fenced and protected in the appropriate manner. These baseless attacks on my character are politically motivated, and I intend to hold to account those responsible for making them. To that end, I have this evening instructed specialist defamation lawyers to avoid prejudicing or complicating any future legal process. I will not be making any further comment about this matter at the time. Now, I saw that post on her Instagram on Friday night, and the comments underneath it were, you know, loads and loads of people saying, look, Zara, I share your politics, I support you the whole time, but please stop posting, right? If you're posting at 11:30 that you're going to sue Jeremy Corbyn, that's not a good way to launch a party. On Sunday night, Zara Sultana did withdraw that threat. We'll get to that in a moment. We're going to stick to the chronology, though. So also on Friday, Zara Sultana backed the open letter penned by a number of activists asking for responsibility for arranging a founding conference to be shifted from MPs to them. You remember, we spoke to Joshua Virasamy, one of the authors of this open letter on Friday's show. That letter now has 6,000 signatures. As for Corbyn, well, he was speaking to a Peace and Justice project over the weekend.
800,000 people have signed up to join in that. 800,000 people who want to see something different. The process that we're going through at the moment has been, you're obviously aware of it, quite difficult over the last few days. But I am absolutely determined this party will be founded. This party will have its founding conference in November. This party will be open, democratic, and grassroots based, and will be a party that enthuses, excites, and mobilizes people in their community to achieve a better thing in their community, and will be a real alternative to the false offer and the lies and the racism of Nigel Farage reform and the far right within our society. We need an organization to do that. The process... And the process that's going on at the moment, despite what some people have discussed endlessly on social media is such a blessing and such a curse at the same time, isn't it? Is that the Independent Alliance Group of MPs, Zara Sultana, myself, Ayub Khan, Shaukat Adam and Adnan Hussain are together organising not to run it, not to control it, not to direct it, merely to facilitate it.
No, I mean, you know, people were commenting that that was somewhat conciliatory, which it was. I found it a bit frustrating the way he was saying, you know, this problem was caused by all this nonsense on social media, in the sense that there were all these people sort of trying to cause trouble on social media, and this was sort of a mountain made out of a molehill. But kind of what I saw, I mean, obviously there were people on the right wing of politics who were trying to cause trouble, but what I saw on social media was loads of people like on left Twitter or whatever saying, guys, please stop. And all the nonsense was coming from the supposed leaders of the party. So I think to sort of shift the blame and say this was all just, you know, shit talk on social media by other people, a bit disingenuous anyway. Sultana says, Zara Sultana put out a conciliatory message on Sunday evening as well. So this is where she withdraws the legal threat. So she says, over the past few days, I've spoken with comrades across our movement for the sake of the party and as an act of good faith. I will not be pursuing legal proceedings despite the baseless and unsubstantiated allegations against me. And the directors of MOU Operations Limited have issued a welcome statement clarifying the legal and financial situations. That was Jamie Driscoll, Andrew Feinstein, Beth Winter and others sort of saying the money's safe, essentially. Zara says, I know many people are feeling demoralized. I share that feeling. We find ourselves in a regrettable situation, but my motivation has always been to ensure the collective strength of our movement, put members first and build the genuinely democratic conference and socialist party we so urgently need. I am determined to reconcile and move forward. I am engaged in ongoing discussions with Jeremy, for whom, like all socialists of my generation, I have nothing but respect. We will find a way to continue in a unified way, centering the grassroots of our movement. I am certain this is possible. Indeed, it must be. And fascism is growling at the door. The stakes are too high for failure to be an option. Both Jeremy and I remain committed to making this project a success, and we can all confirm that the conference will go ahead as planned in November. This party does not belong to any one of us. It belongs to you. Ash, my question for you, is this salvageable?
Is this salvageable? Well, all right. A few months ago, Reform looked like they were in total crisis. So they had Rupert Lowe's defection, Elon Musk was, gunning for Nigel Farage, Zia Yusuf resigned for about 5 minutes and then came back. And now they're leading in pretty much every major opinion polls and they seem stronger than ever. So I think that political parties can withstand periods of volatility, chaos, and crisis. But their ability to do that is very much conditional on a whole bunch of other things. And I'm not convinced that the underlying causes of this total clusterfuck have actually been dealt with. So one underlying cause is, of course, there are some significant political differences between Team Jeremy, Team Zara, and their respective visions for the party. Now, I do think that while the differences are significant, when you think about, what has been made public and what has been published and, from which party, it's not as straightforward to say Team Jeremy and Kerry Murphy and all them lot, very, very undemocratic. Team Zara, very democratic. I think that there are democratic and undemocratic elements to both, and you can't really pigeonhole them when you look into it. The most significant difference seems to be that Jeremy has wanted more power for people who are already MPs, the Independent Alliance, which includes people who have very different political points of view from Zara Sultana, and also the rest of the movement that, she says that she's speaking for. That is a substantive political difference. I do think the most important element here, though, has been the personalities of everyone who's involved. So I think on the one hand, you've got Jeremy Corbyn, who it seems can be both very defensive and avoidant when things are difficult. So this was a part of Andrew Feinstein and Jamie Driscoll and Beth Winter's letter, hinting that one side had wanted to talk and the other was dodging all the calls. I think we can make an educated guess about what side that was. So you've got one side which is, defensive and avoidant. And then I think this is just abundantly clear from the series of actions taken by Zara Sultana within, a 48-hour period of unilaterally launching a membership portal, then sort of seeing that blow up in her face a bit, and then going, okay, there's going to be this handover process led by activists. It belongs to the membership, this party, and then also being like, okay, but I'm going to sue you, and all of this happening within such a concentrated period of time, is that I would say that the sins on her side are very much short-sightedness and rashness. So I think that you've got some real personality issues amongst the leadership, and I'm not sure if I've seen, for all the conciliation in the statements, that anyone's really learning from their mistakes. And the thing is that I think that there are mistakes being made on both sides, and I think that those mistakes originate both in the personality of the leaders and probably the people advising them, right? Because if you're a high-profile political leader like Zara Sultana is, and you've had your legal advice, and of course lawyers are going to say to you, I think you can win this case, I think it's all on your side, because they've got literally a financial incentive to do that, because you're paying them. They and if you win a case, they get paid. They can't give you sound political advice. So who is it that was around you who was saying to you that at 11:30 on a Friday night, you should say that you're going to sue, it seems to be Jeremy Corbyn and his allies? Who is saying this to you? Because it's bad advice. And if there's no one around you that's in your inner circle and saying the opposite, if there's no one around you who's in your inner circle and saying, like, you need to give this, 24 to 48 hours, you're under a lot of pressure, you're being scrutinized, and I'm taking everybody at their word here, because I think that, it's important to do that. I think everyone is sincere in wanting to do the right thing, but their ability to identify what that right thing is not so good. Is that I can believe Zara when she says, I'm coming from a place of real fear that I was being shut out, right? That I was being shut out by Jeremy and, the independent MPs, all the rest of it. I can totally believe that. I also can believe that some of her steps to mitigate being shut out were really unstrategic and totally worsened the problem that she was dealing with. And so I just wonder, who was it that was close to Jeremy saying, dodge, Zara's and Feinstein's calls? Who was it that was close to Zara being like, yeah, I think you should pull the trigger on this legal action at 11:30 on a Friday night? Because the advisors that you choose as a leader are a reflection of your own judgment. Because no leader can have perfect judgment. There are going to be blind spots. There are going to be, weaknesses. There are going to be tendencies that they have that need managing. And a good leader chooses for advisors that mitigate against their weaknesses and bolster their strengths, rather than what seems to be here to be the opposite, which is you've got people around them who are reinforcing some of these worst tendencies. So can it be salvaged? Yes. Will it be salvaged? I don't know, because I think that there is just, I've not seen anything which tells me you've learned from the errors in judgment on both sides that got you here. And then I think there's a third thing, which is structural. And to be honest, this isn't Jeremy's fault or Zara's fault or the fault of people who are close to them. And it's to do with the way in which the UK left is still so dependent on the Labour Party for choosing its leaders. And I think that you can admire the strengths, the fortitude, and the contributions of both Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana, whilst also recognising that they became MPs and they were selected through Labour Party processes, right? And the reason why that they had prominence on the left is because they managed to hang in there through, the doldrum years of the 1980s and the 90s, and, in Zara's case, post 2019. And the Labour Party, I don't think, does select for good leaders. There aren't many Labour politicians where I go, actually, I find you a really thoughtful individual, a really compelling speaker, all of these things that you'd want in a leader. I don't think they necessarily select for that. So we've, as the British left, had this sort of like passivity when it comes to the selection of leaders. And that's because our pathway into politics is so closed off. And that's the reason why in the US they get these generationally talented individuals, not flawless, not beyond reproach, but generationally talented. Your Zoran Mamdanis, your AOCs, like your Ilhan Omars. And I think that the UK left is constantly in this position of trying to compensate for the weaknesses of individuals who fundamentally we haven't had a hand in choosing ourselves, right? We've kind of inherited them through this other thing, which is the Labour Party. So in a way, this problem of you've got these two leaders whose temperaments seem to have brought out the worst in each other so far, is that I think that that's downstream of the original problem, which is that you've got this new party which wants to do politics in a different way, which wants to be speaking for, the UK left with all of its, contradictions and tensions and all the rest of it. But the leaders are still hand-me-downs from the Labour Party, right? I think that is the original sin.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that last thing. I mean, I'm very much on the same page in terms of is this sandwich, but I think, it's embarrassing what's happened, but you can definitely recover from an embarrassing news cycle. I think the issue is, what does the last, 4 days show us about the judgment of the two people who are inevitably sort of the most important people in this party? And I think we need to see some good judgment quite quickly to sort of give people the confidence that this can be anything other than a mess. Because I think, people's estimations about the judgments of Corbyn and Zara Sultana have been damaged, which is fine. They can make that back up, but they have to make that back up. We asked you guys, can your party salvage things? 310 votes. 57% say yes. 43% say no. So actually quite close. The global Sumud flotilla is around a week away from reaching Israeli waters. The mission, made up of 50 boats, is intending to open a humanitarian corridor to the besieged Gaza Strip. With global figures like Greta Thunberg on board, the Israelis have tried to dismiss previous flotillas as made up of, quote, selfie yachts. But this time around, their rhetoric is getting more worrying. Over the weekend, Novara uncovered that if you Googled the Sumud flotilla, the top result would be a sponsored page set up by the Israeli government. And the aim of that page? To characterize the humanitarian mission as instead a, quote, terror flotilla. The website purports to show what they call the hidden networks behind the flotilla, and it includes this web of individuals, which purports to show connections between organisers of the flotillas and Hamas. Now, the connections are incredibly tenuous. The key claims appears to be that an organiser of the flotilla was arrested by the Egyptian dictatorship for helping organise a march to Gaza, and that the Muslim Brotherhood were also involved, or some people from the Muslim Brotherhood were involved in that campaign. Now, of course, the Muslim Brotherhood were democratically elected to lead Egypt before they were overthrown in a military coup in 2013. Right, so the idea that you helped organise a demonstration in Egypt that their military dictatorship didn't like doesn't really seem like a reason to judge someone, particularly harshly. To me, this looks like desperate stuff. But that doesn't mean it's not worrying. David Adler, who we've often had on Novara Live, is on the flotilla, and he tweeted this. This is really terrifying. Google is allowing the state of Israel to sponsor top search results with absurd accusations that we are harbouring terror. This is pure incitement and puts the lives of all participants at risk. Still, we sail on to Gaza. Now, the reason claims like this from Israel are putting the lives of people on the flotilla at risk is because we know what Israel does to people they claim are Hamas. They kill them. That's what happened to the Al Jazeera journalists that Israel called Hamas. That's what happened to the UN aid workers that Israel called Hamas. And that's what happened to the medical staff and patients in hospitals Israel said were associated with Hamas. And since the weekend, Israel has continued to ramp up its claims about the flotilla. Their foreign ministry put out this video on Twitter.
These ties extend to the Hamas Sumud flotilla, which claims to be independent, but is deeply tied to Hamas. Hamas's North African chief Youssef Hamdan personally hosted Marwan Ben Guataya, a Sumud spokesperson. Hamdan also appeared with Wael Nawar, another flotilla spokesman listed on Sumud's site. From Barawi to Hamdan, Ben Guetaya and Nawar, the web is clear. This is a Hamas flotilla.
Now, again, the claim seems to be that because some people involved in the flotilla have ever in their lives met members of Hamas, they are therefore Hamas, and this is therefore a Hamas flotilla. Of course, by that logic, Richard Nixon was a member of the Chinese Communist Party and the Tony Blair Institute is an outpost of the IRA. It's nonsense. But it is incredibly dangerous. Former Greek Finance Minister Yanis Varoufakis has written for Novara Media this weekend demanding we resist Israel's attempts to smear the aid flotilla as terrorists. And he joined me earlier today.
As we speak, the IDF, the Israeli army, is planning meticulously the manner in which they will assault our people on the flotilla. The first step before doing this is to issue the smear campaigns that they have in typical, well-tried fashion. First, they slap the Hamas logo on your forehead, and then they shoot you. Sometimes they shoot you first and then slap the Hamas logo on you. But on this occasion, because they are, as I said, meticulous planners of their genocidal activities, they've done this in advance. There's a very long tradition. Go back many, many years since the first flotilla was attacked with people that were killed by Israeli commanders. Now, I want to believe that they will not kill our people now, but there's no doubt that they will abduct them, they will humiliate them, they will subject them to fear and terror in their cells. They've done this before, they will do it again. Who knows, maybe this time they will go further. Maybe they will torture them physically. Maybe they will kill some of them. Look, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that the genocide is continuing. The flotilla, the very brave, courageous women and men on them, are acting as the conscience of humanity to break this blockade, symbolically to bring some food and medicine and baby formula, but that's only symbolic, in order to demonstrate that humanity is not going to accept the continuation of this massive war crime stroke genocide, and they're about to be attacked. So all of us, you, me, everyone, we have a duty to prepare public opinion, to create enough noise so the calculating propagandists who are measuring, they're trying to calculate the pros and cons, the benefits and losses of the Israeli propaganda machine, realize that they have more to lose by abusing our people and by assaulting them in the propaganda game than to gain. And this is up to us to make sure that the calculus in the head of these genocidal propagandists shifts in a direction where they will be coy about doing it. It's the only thing we can do to protect good men and women who are doing the business that we should all be engaged in, which is to end this genocide that stigmatizes our generation.
I suppose to put ourselves in the heads of the Israeli government who's looking at these pros and cons. Now, of course, I'm sure we both agree they would have no moral qualms whatsoever about, frankly, nuking everyone on the flotilla. But when it comes to the strategic question, it does seem to me like there would be more cons than pros for the Israelis to do anything, for example, to Greta Thunberg or to our friend David Adler purely because he's an American citizen. So do you see, how are you thinking about this? So to me, yeah, I'm sure Israel would love to do whatever it could to all of these people, but presumably having people like Greta on the flotilla does give them some level of protection. How are you thinking about this?
Well, it is good that there are prominent people, activists, parliamentarians, Jews like Comrade David Adler, who are making it very hard for the Israeli propaganda machine to portray them as Hamas functionaries. Having said that, we saw what they did with Greta Thunberg before. The last time Greta very courageously was on a flotilla, the IDF, the Israeli army, took a picture of her wearing a life vest while she was being handed a sandwich. So this is, they're very good at propaganda, and they will try to denigrate these figures, the figureheads of the flotilla, And they will try to portray them as, pampered Western kids who have nothing better to do with their time than to enter without much thought or reason a war zone. This is how they want to present it. So it's important that we, and I think that congratulations, Novara is doing a very good job at this. We need to explode that myth before it happens. This is a genocidal project, and the people who are trying to enter Gaza are in the business of doing that which the United Nations should be doing, our government should be doing, our great and good institutions should be doing, which is to end the genocide which is unfolding with the connivance of our governments, even those, maybe I would say especially those, who are now shedding crocodile tears and recognize Palestine.
I think it's very likely that they will take very violent action against a boat which doesn't have Europeans or Americans on it. Because remember, there are 50 boats as part of this flotilla. I assume if there are any boats that only have non-European or non-North Americans or Arabs on, or, heaven forbid, Palestinians, they're going to have absolutely no qualms strategically or morally about causing real harm. We've seen that, however prominent you are, Shireen Abu Akleh, right? However prominent you are, if you're a Palestinian, you're fair game, according to the Israelis. Yanis, I want to talk about a slightly different development over the last couple of days, which is Britain alongside Australia, France, Canada, a few other countries recognizing the state of Palestine. Does that seem significant to you?
It is significant because it shows that public opinion can make a difference. These governments are totally in the pocket of the apartheid state. They have aided and abetted Netanyahu from day one. They may not have liked him, but they aided and abetted him. They still aid and abet him. But, at some point they realized that they are bleeding public support. The Labour Party in Britain, the Australian Labour Party in Australia, Carney, the freshly appointed or elected Prime Minister in Canada, Macron in France, they are all scared of their own electorates because they can see that what happens is the ultra-right is effectively genocide washing itself by embracing Israel, trying to prove that, yes, they are fascists, but they are not anti-Semites. And the left is abandoning them. So the centrists are, they need to do something to demonstrate that they are not complicit in the genocide. But in the end, of course, we should see through this. Because if Keir Starmer wanted, if he really cared about the Palestinian state, the first thing he should try to do is to stop the genocide. Because if the genocide continues and is completed, there will be no Palestinian state. And the thing to do if you want to end the genocide is stop providing weapons and to stop providing military and intelligence support as the British Army is doing from its Akrotiri base in Cyprus. If he really wanted Keir Starmer to make a difference, he would have sent the Royal Navy to escort the flotilla so that the Israelis do not attack it. Those would be moves that would end the genocide tomorrow. If Western Europe and the United States and Canada and Australia embargoed Israel, if they stop providing them with F-35s and the accessories that are necessary to run them, and the bombs, and the intelligence support, then the genocide would end. Now, I've been part of political parties, I've led political parties that have advocated for the recognition of the Palestinian state. But I very much fear that our extreme center Zionist politicians like Keir Starmer are only recognizing the Palestinian state under duress, under pressure from the population, from voters, so that it never actually is instituted, it's never actually realized. We, those who are participating in the pro-Palestinian movement, in the peace movement, along with our Jewish comrades like David Adler, who want a genuine resolution so that from the river to the sea, we have equal political rights, above all else. We have been arguing for the recognition of the Palestinian state in order to create equal political rights, at least discursively, between Palestinians, Armenians, Jews, Muslims, whoever lives between the river and the sea. And we look askance at people like Macron and Keir Starmer, who are, Johnny-come-latelys. It's good that they are recognizing Palestine, but we are going to be pushing them and pressurizing them to take the steps like boycotting, divesting, and sanctioning Israel, which is the only thing that is going to change the course that Netanyahu designed 30 years ago for ending any possibility of a Palestinian state.
What's your analysis of why Western leaders, I mean, like Keir Starmer, he's a prime example here, won't do anything beyond the symbolic when it comes to Palestine? Because I had a friend yesterday who sort of asked me, Keir Starmer, why is he recognizing Palestine, considering he's been so, I suppose, slavishly following Israeli lines in many ways, including the prescribing of Palestine action? And I suppose the best answer I could give is because this is cost-free. I think they are genuinely terrified of anything that might have the smallest sort of hit to growth. They really want to say Britain is open for investment. So the idea of an activist group being successful in kicking out a company like Elbit Systems was terrifying to them. So that's why they cracked down really hard there. But they were willing to go against the Americans and the Israelis to recognize Palestine because it doesn't cost anything. And so this is kind of about sort of money. But I don't know, you might have a different analysis.
Well, firstly, you have to look at, all these labor leaders, most of them having received quite substantial sums of sponsorship from Israeli sources and Zionist sources, from Yvette Cooper to, let's not name names now, but half of the British cabinet has received financial support from Zionist sources. But that's not the main thing. The main thing, the reason why he's now put on this this show of support for the Palestinian state is because he is looking at the opinion polls. Already in the general election, he lost a number of seats as a result of his pro-genocide stance. That exodus of labor voters has become majestic, gigantic, and he wants to stem it. But he wants to stem it, exactly as you put it, in a manner which will not really upset Israel. Because Netanyahu is kicking and screaming now and threatening Starmer with this, that, and the other. But deep down, he's not really worried. The only thing that would worry Netanyahu now is sanctions, an embargo on weapons, an embargo on trade, financial embargo, something similar to what the West is doing to Putin and Russia. That would really scare the living daylights out of Netanyahu. So I would not be surprised if next time Netanyahu and Keir Starmer meet, despite this public row following the recognition of the Palestinian state by Keir Starmer, I wouldn't be surprised if they wink at one another saying, oh, okay, we keep moving on together.
No, I agree. I think there's an element of sort of Netanyahu's anger that's a bit performative. It's sort of say, oh, I'm so angry at this thing, which makes it seem like, these Western leaders can tell their electorates that they've fallen out with Netanyahu, even though they're, as you say, sort of not withdrawing any of the material commitments that Israel needs to continue its genocide. That was Yanis Varoufakis speaking to me earlier, and that was only part of our conversation. We went on to discuss why his country, Greece, hasn't joined the UK in recognising Palestine. And really interesting, actually, sort of talking about how Tsipras ended up getting quite close to Israel after Varoufakis left that government. And he told me who he thinks should lead your party. So we'll put that out later tonight. As the week goes on, we'll also continue to get updates from our man on the flotilla, Kieran Andreou. And here's what he sent us today.
I think there's been a genuine sense of a change of gears in the past couple of days, and we really are kind of cutting a swath towards Gaza now. We're like 140, 150 nautical miles west of Crete. We expect to kind of get there sometime tomorrow late on or early on Thursday and group with the 6 Greek boats which will join us. We are an estimated 5 days away from what the organisers of the flotilla call the Orange Zone, basically the line beyond which Israel has been known to illegally intercept and kidnap flotilla participants in the past. So we're about 5 days away from that line, and it's an extra 2 days beyond that line roughly, to the shores of Gaza. One of the big developments over the past few days has been the ramping up, if you like, the escalating rhetoric by Israel about the flotilla. And yesterday there were drone sightings over some of the fleet, not our boat, but somewhere nearby. A couple of the boats reported seeing drones that were flying pretty close to them, pretty low. What we do have, though, now more than ever is, as I mentioned a moment ago, safety in numbers, so 51 boats. That makes a huge psychological difference as well. The other thing, of course, that we have is public support. We're really feeling that on our boats, the widespread public support. And it may have always been there, but we can sense it picking up as we approach Gaza.
We're planning to show daily updates from Kieran as the flotilla approaches Israeli waters. So keep looking out for that. And it's great to see all your messages of solidarity and all the support that's been coming in for Kieran over the past days and weeks. And as Yanis Varoufakis said, we need to keep being very noisy about this flotilla because obviously the Israelis are trying to smear it, and who knows to what end they are doing that. So do keep tweeting, posting, talking to people about the flotilla in the coming days. TikTok's global revenue in 2024 was $23 billion, and there is increasing pressure on the company to spend more of that money on keeping its users safe, which made this story last month a bit of a shock. Now, the details here. So it's TikTok to lay off hundreds of UK moderators as it shifts to AI. That was from the FT. And the details of the story were that TikTok had announced plans to fire its entire UK safety and trust team, which numbers around 500 people. And some of those workers have been fighting back. They staged a protest outside TikTok's London headquarters last Thursday afternoon. I was there with the Communication Workers Union and spoke to some of the people there.
When I started 4.5 years ago, there were a lot of promises of company growth, of growth within the same company to be able to, get to a better position. That the company was always going to need people behind the computers. And now the message is we don't actually need people behind the computers can do that by themselves. We've been training that artificial intelligence for years now. And honestly, what we can see on the back end is that the intelligence is not really locating all these aggressions, all these pieces of content accurately.
The redundancy announcement has certainly been one of the most extreme attacks on the workforce in trust and safety, but they've had their terms and conditions degraded for the last couple of years because they're increasingly under threat of the jobs being offshored, so their targets have been increased while their time to take rest breaks, like mental health breaks, has been decreased. So I think that while this is an acute moment in their career at TikTok, it's certainly not new in terms of the disregard which management has shown towards them.
The response from TikTok so far is, they haven't engaged massively with us. Obviously, they announced these redundancies knowing that we were a week away from a union recognition vote, which we have evidence to believe was intentionally done to foil the vote. If these workers had been unionised, they would have had a much better chance of really negotiating something safe, like a safe exit from the business or redeployment. So far, they've not had any support in finding a new job at TikTok. And actually, many of them have been rejected from roles that they think they would be qualified for, or on paper, the job descriptions fit what they're doing. So far, we don't think that they have responded very well to it.
So you heard there, to add insult to injury for making all of these people redundant, they did it just as the union was about to get recognition, which probably wasn't a coincidence. Ash, I wanted your thoughts on this because, the idea that social media is dangerous, that it should be regulated more, that it's a threat to children, particularly, I think has gained a lot of traction, rightly, over the past couple of years, especially from the work of Jonathan Haidt. Aaron interviewed him on Downstream earlier this year. I'm a big fan of his work, actually, especially on this. There's some dissonance, isn't there? Sort of the fact that this is becoming politically ever more sort of relevant. And then TikTok, despite its billions of pounds in revenue, presumably not much operating costs, right, to just run a platform, is firing its entire health and safety or safety and monitoring team in the UK. I feel like the UK government should be able to say, look, if you want to run this platform in this country, you need to have at least some safety and monitoring people in this country?
So I think the first thing to look at is that this is also part of wider trends across the tech industry. So a few years ago, you had this real drive to unionize within some of the bigger social media platforms, and the response. And I think that this is because it's also coming at a moment where, um, the ability for AI to replace human workers not as effectively, but sort of at least in a sort of shallow perfunctory manner, that's really increased. So you're seeing these two things dovetail together, and I think that AI, particularly within tech, is being brought in to discipline workforces. So that means layoffs, that means undermining unionization drives, you name it. The second thing, though, that I really want to talk about is the particular role of using AI enabled content moderation, and what that can do and what it can't do. So, one of the things that we've seen with TikTok in particular is that its approach to content moderation is very much based on using particular words to screen out and block content. So, that's why you've ended up with this absolute abuse of the English language, where in order to get around these sort of forbidden words, people, instead of using words like kill or die, they use the phrase unalive. Instead of talking about rape or sexual assault, they talk about grape or use the grape emoji. Instead of using the word sex, it's segs, seggs. And I don't think that that has made TikTok a better place to be necessarily. It's become this more infantilized place to be, while at the same time, you still have all these problems of, particularly for young people, cyberbullying, the problems of low self-esteem, the sort of corrosion of people's attention spans. Obviously, you still have TikTok being used as a way to sort of flood the zone with shit, quite frankly. And whether that might be sort of, actively misleading news content on the one hand, or sort of, the use of like fake podcasts and stunts by OnlyFans creators to sort of, drive traffic towards, their particular services. Really low grade misleading information, but you can't say the word sex. And I think that that is the direction of content moderation for TikTok. And I think that it is, I mean, I don't want to sound like, Frank Herbert advocating the Butlerian jihad, but I can really see the ways in which AI is making us stupider, less critical, less literate as a culture. And I think if you combine that approach to content moderation with these generalized assaults on our attention span and critical capacity, I really do fear for the human race. I just think we're going to TikTok ourselves out of existence sometimes. I really worry about our collective brain power.
Yeah, I mean, at Novara Media, we have a TikTok, we have an Instagram, we have an X. If you use those platforms, you should follow us on them. But if you don't use those platforms, do not start. I think there is a growing anti-social media consensus in Novara Media Towers, even though if you're on them, you might as well watch good quality content. But feel free to switch off as well. That might be better for your mental health. Ash, thank you so much for joining me this evening.
But you know what? We also do long form content on novaramedia.com. So that's where you can find our articles. So that's opinion pieces, that's reporting, that's features. And I promise you, you will never see the word segs in our copy. If it comes up, I'm quitting. I'm literally resigning. That's it.
I didn't know it made sense that that's why people say unalive. I hadn't realized why unalive suddenly emerged in the discourse, and that was to avoid, the censors. Strange. Thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow at 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.